what happens in that growing momentum is that the two worlds mythology gets sort of solidified into our more current notions of the supernatural and the natural worlds. And then religion gets understood in that relationship. And then what happens is for sort of philosophical arguments, and then increasingly the emerging of scientific arguments, the supernatural world becomes less and less plausible to people. It becomes less and less believable. And so what happens is the two worlds mythology collapses within the scientific worldview. There aren't two worlds. The hallmark of the scientific world is naturalism. There is a universe. There is a unified single reality. Now, the problem with that is that means we took away the cosmic home for all of those ecologies and practices, Buddhism and Taoism and Zen and Christianity and Zoroastrianism and Judaism and Christianity. And yet we can't do without the ecologies of practices that they gave us for dealing with foolishness and a loss of meaning. So what do is you unhome all of these ecologies of practices, secularism rises, and what you have is people can't believe in the two worlds mythology, but they can't live without an ecology of practices for cultivating wisdom and self-transcendence. That's the meaning crisis. It's a wisdom famine. It's a wisdom famine.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Chasing Consciousness. So today, we have the important topic of the meaning crisis and the embodied practice that could offer a solution to discuss. This conversation is a part 2, following on directly from episode 51 at the end of last series, where John and I talked about collective intelligence and how the evolution of cognition has led homo-sapiens to being such effective collaborators. Also, how collective knowledge and wisdom of our society is distributed and passed on to later generations. We also spoke about the relevance of the work of Carl Jung on the collective unconscious, of psychiatrist Ian McGilchrist on the split brain research, and of the biologist Michael Levin on various layers of cellular cognition. It was so fascinating that we didn't have time to connect the sheer power of our collective intelligence to today's discussion about what John has called the meaning crisis. So today we're going to come back to the importance of our propensity for self-transcendence and the correspondent risk of self-delusion, which happens to have become the theme of this next series. And I can't wait to also ask him about the importance of a sense of the sacred to our sense of meaning in life, also to our mental health and potentially even to the progress of humanity. And then we're going to be zooming in on the importance of this range of embodied practices that John calls an ecology of practices, things like Qigong, circling, practices that induce flow states, meditation, and in some sense, therefore, to rediscover perhaps lost forms of knowledge and embodied cognition that John thinks can really pull us back from the brink of self-delusion and potentially even self-destruction in this case. Now, of course, there is only one polymath who can speak about so many things and connect them all like a ninja of the mind, as one listener called him after the last episode, the cognitive scientist and philosopher John Vervaeke. Vervaeke is the director of the University of Toronto's Consciousness and Wisdom Studies Lab and its cognitive science program, where he teaches an introduction to cognitive science and the cognitive science of consciousness. Vervaeke has also taught courses on Buddhism and cognitive science in the Buddhism psychology and mental health programs for over 15 years. And he is also the author and presenter of the much-loved YouTube series, Awakening from the Meaning Crisis and After Socrates. Now, I have wanted to speak to John about including the meaning crisis perspective in the collective intelligence discussion well, ever since we hung up at the end of last series. So I just can't wait to get into this. So without further ado, let's go. John Vervaeke, welcome back to Chasing Consciousness. How are you today?
Freddie, it's a great pleasure to be back. I'm very good. Thank you for asking.
Wow, John. I mean, the last dialogue was just gold dust. Thank you so much. It was the perfect foil to all of my biases about collective intelligence. So thank you. And we covered a whole bunch of topics that were really, really relevant to today's topic of the meaning crisis. And they set the scene perfectly, but we couldn't cover it all in time. And so we needed this devoted follow-up episode. So thank you so much for coming back, John. I know how much you're in demand at the moment. So today, I want to plug in some of that dynamic, emergent, collective intelligence features that we were discussing last time.
Mm.
I want to plug it into this meaning crisis equation. And then I want to discuss in detail the psychology behind this ecology of embodied and dialectic practices that you're forwarding as a solution. So I want to start pulling out something that really struck me from our last conversation about the very same mechanisms in our brains that evolved to permit self-transcendence are also ironically the same ones that permit self-delusion.
Mm-hmm.
So much
Mm-hmm.
so that I gave the series of this series the theme of self-delusion or self-transcendence. And it strikes me as fundamentally important to the meaning crisis, although I'm not quite sure how. So maybe you can start reminding the listeners about this inherent risk in following our adaptive tendency for self-transcendence of deluding ourselves.
Yeah. So, um, the basic idea is the processes that make us adaptively intelligent are processes that have to deal with an overwhelming amount of information. We talked about that within and without. Um, and we can't possibly remember all the information that we have in our memories at any moment. We can't possibly pay attention to everything that's out there available that we could pay attention to. We can't possibly consider all the possibilities or all the implications of any proposition. And this is a repeated theme, and it's been through the core of my work. And so somehow what we have to do is we have to zero in on the relevant information, and we do it very rapidly and very fast in all those domains in a highly interconnected fashion. And this is the hallmark, I would argue, and I have argued and I've published multiple times on, is the hallmark of our general intelligence, what makes us the kind of intelligent beings we are. Now, the problem you face with that is that you are actually ignoring vast amounts of information within and without, logical and possible, moment by moment. Those two are bound together. This is called the frame problem. And that means there's a reliably good chance every moment to moment that the information you're ignoring is actually the information that you need to solve your problem or to avoid getting eaten or whatever it is, right? And so those two are bound together. Those two are bound together. Now, what you can't do is say, well, I don't want to I don't want to fall prey to that proneness to self-deception, so I'm going to shut off that filtering process. Nope, can't do that. You have to be an infinite mind given infinite amounts of time. So that's not an option for you. So what you have to do is you have to figure out a way of overcoming that self-deception without destroying your intelligence. You somehow have to turn your intelligence on itself, right? And you have to use your intelligence to correct the deception that is always looming in in the use of your intelligence. And that turning it on, right, the way it turns on itself, and you know this in one of the most prototypical moments of transcendence that you have, which is a moment of insight when you realize that you framed something the wrong way. I think I said something like this, oh, I thought she was angry, but it turns out she's afraid. And you realize that you've been paying attention to the wrong things. You haven't noticed things you should notice. You haven't put them together in the right way. You've had a moment of insight. You had a moment of aha. And that moment of self-transcendence, right, is the way in which the intelligence is being sort of turned back on itself and correcting itself. And so you've got this ongoing tension. You're always seeking to self-transcend, but you can't self-transcend to sort of the point of destroying your intelligence. And so you're always prone to self-deception, and then you're always seeking self-transcendence out of it. So you're seeking insight, or perhaps a whole system of insights, which is a transformation, perhaps a whole cascade of insights, which is the flow experience, etc. And as soon as we start talking about this, we can start to hear some of the experiences that people seek out because they are deeply transformative. They seek out transformative experience. They seek out flow experiences. They seek out, you know, plausibly, this is something that requires argument, but it is an argument I've been making and publishing on, that mystical experiences are sort of a flow experience at sort of a very high level of insight. Um, and so we we are drawn to self transcendence because if we aren't, then the threats to our intelligence from self-deception will pile up self-destructively until we are ruined. And so self-transcendence isn't an option. Now, the degree you can cultivate it is, of course, and that's just and then correspondingly, the degree to which you are trying to overcome being foolish, and don't we all want to do that, right? Is the degree to which you are cultivating that self-transcendence. Just one more point, and then I'll be quiet because I want to hear what you have to say about that. But that adaptive intelligence, I sort of speak of it as a single thing, relevance realization, but it's actually a very complex, very multi-layered, dynamical system. And so when you try to intervene in it in order to reduce the self-deception, you have to intervene in it in parallel, in many places, in many different times, in a highly coordinated and dynamically complex fashion. That's why things like Buddhism have the Eightfold Path. You have to have whole domains that are all interwoven together. So you need these ecologies of practices in order to ameliorate the self-deception and enhance the self-transcendence that enhances your connectedness to reality. And I think a good word for that, since it seems to be applied to these ecologies of practices, is the cultivation of wisdom. And
Mhm.
so that's what I mean when I say wisdom isn't optional because foolishness is inevitable.
And this is something we're definitely about to get into. And I love the way you've framed that in terms of self-correction, because I think this really is what we see in nature is that
Yeah.
every stage of evolution, of increasing complexity, sees a sort of self-correction mechanism. And why shouldn't there be one with cognition as well? Great. Okay. So bearing that risk in mind, listeners, and bearing in mind everything we discussed about distributed cognition, remembering the importance also of the sense of connectedness with the wider mammalian group, which is very, very particular to human psychology,
Mhm.
and how it correlates also directly with mental health. Okay, bearing all of that in mind, let's move on to the meaning crisis. Now, some years ago already, you made a hugely popular lecture series on this topic. So obviously hit a nerve. It's available on YouTube, and it's called The Awakening from the Meaning Crisis. And it really does give listeners this truly multi-perspectival historical evaluation of the nature of this crisis and the reasons for it. So I really, really recommend that if anybody enjoys today's conversation. But by means of sort of setting the context for the crisis, John, can you give us an overview of the evolutionary history of how humans, and particularly Westerners, today I want to mostly focus on sort of Western worldview,
Mhm.
have formed meaning in the past before then describing this sort of perfect storm of coinciding things that came together that led to us falling into a meaning crisis. By no means for the first time, incidentally. Feel free
Mhm.
to mention some of the previous times because I think it's interesting to see
Mhm. Mhm.
recurrence of certain things. And feel free to take your time here, John, because I know there's an awful lot to this.
Yeah, and my sigh is your question is completely fair, Freddie. I'm not making any criticism of the question. In fact, the question. I mean, I've dedicated my life in some ways to this question, and so I feel I feel reverential in like towards the answer that I'm seeking. Um, so um, the main idea here is that the cultivation of wisdom, as you said, and we talked about last time, is this cultivation of this connectedness to yourself, to other. Your connectedness to yourself is that you're an agent. You don't just behave like inanimate objects, like my water bottle, right? You change your behavior in order to change the outcomes of your behavior in order to feed back and maintain your own existence, right? And so you have a fundamental relationship to yourself as an agent. You need to be fundamentally connected to yourself. As you said, we have to be fundamentally connected to other people because we're primate mammals that work within a cultural framework. And then we also need to be, we have to have a fundamental connection to reality. We, so we, um, well, just one quick way of noting that horror is not like it's not just terror, it's not just fear. Most horror movies aren't horror movies, they're terror movies. They this is sort of a pun, they prey upon our fear of predation. Things leap at us out of the dark and render us or destroy us or eat us. Or horror, and there are very good horror movies like The Shining. Horror is when you're feeling that you're losing your grip on reality. It's more like the the looming dread of insanity. And so we fundamentally want and need to be connected to what is real. So I'm just trying to get that this connectedness is right. It's nested. So you have an ecology of practices. That means there's many different practices, and they're operating at many different levels of the psyche because of what we said a few minutes ago about how complex and multi-layered it is. And they're happening to these 3 degrees of nestedness within the person, between people and the world. And what you need to do is you need to coordinate all of that in such a fashion and do one more really central connection for culture, connection between generations. The thing that did that in the past was religion. That's what religion does. Religion creates complex living ecologies of practices that are about religio. That's there's a connection between the word religio and religio, that sense of connectedness, belongingness, and connectedness to oneself, to other people, to the world, and across generations. And so and we can come back later and ask, is that just a historical issue or is that a metaphysical necessity, that connection? I'm not making a claim for the second right now. I'm just saying, as a matter of evolutionary history and cross-cultural history, the place that homed these ecologies of practices at all of these levels of our psyche and all of these levels of nesting across generations and with right was religion. Now, the boundary between religion and philosophy, ancient philosophy, is very sketchy here. Like, is Buddhism a philosophy or religion? Is Taoism a philosophy or religion? Is Neoplatonism a philosophy or religion? Stoicism, and I don't need to make that distinction for my argument. If you want to call it philo-religion or religious philosophy, I don't care. That's what it was, right? And so what's important about that, I mean, and you can get some sort of current empirical evidence about this. One very quick piece of evidence: my, well, he was my student, then my TA, then my RA, and I helped supervise and evaluate his PhD. He's now a complete postdoc, so he's my peer. Jinsung Kim did some work where he showed that, when people are cultivating wisdom, the people that are recommended as wise, right? It's you get some very clear evidence that they do better within a religious community than in a secular community if they're trying to cultivate wisdom. But you also see that there's no significant difference between the various religious communities for doing this. So it doesn't seem to be carried by the propositional content. Seems to be carried by all the practices, all the ecology of practices, the transformations of consciousness, the generation of skills, the cultivation of character, the transformation of identity, both individual and collective. So religion is doing this job, and um, And this, of course, is why we still use religious language, even if we're secular, to describe important experiences of self-transcendence, a word drawn out of the religious tradition, or we talk about ecstasy, or we talk about at-one-ment, et cetera, et cetera. And so the first answer I would give you is that historically, in terms of, look, this is an this is a certified exact replica. Your listeners can't see it, but you can see it, right? Of the Lion Man from Germany. You see this figure that's carved out of wood, and it's clearly a lion and a man somehow fused together. And the lion has a Mona Lisa smile, and it's very evocative. And we know it was used in rituals because it was smoothed by being passed from hand to hand multiple times.
Remind us of the carbon dating on that original
It's somewhere between 30 and 40,000 BCE.
That'll throw some anthropology into question, won't it?
Yeah, and so what's interesting, and we've got that sacred sites, Göbekli Tepe, precede agriculture. It wasn't the old story that agriculture led to civilization. It's the other way around, right? And so what we've got is we've got human beings for a very long time practicing religion and across it's universal wherever you go, except post-scientific revolution Europe, right? You find religion. And I'm not saying that religion does not have a lot of criticisms to it, metaphysical criticisms, ethical criticisms, political criticisms. I'm not here to do that, right? I'm not here to defend religion from that. What I'm saying, though, is there was a functionality that explains why it seems to co-emerge with, our full-blown artistic, like these figurines, like the Lion Man, emerged at the same time we're developing projectile weapons and inventing calendars and music and clearly it looks like good evidence for shamanism. All this stuff is co-emerging at the same time. And myself and many other people argue that that's not a coincidence because religion is the cultural homing of that cultivation of wisdom and enhanced connectedness, meaning in life at all the levels of the psyche, self, others, world, and across generations. So that's my first answer to you.
Can we then say that in some sense, science, the scientific revolution, stepped in with a way of answering religion's questions, in the case of the pre-scientific revolution, metaphysical questions, and it came in saying, no, we can do a better job? Is that where the crisis began? Is that where the crumbling started?
No, I think the crumbling starts earlier. I think the crumbling starts sort of in the late Middle Ages for Europe. And I'm going to follow your recommendation that we limit ourselves to Europe right now. There's different stories to be told for Asia, of course, and North America is a different thing because it's a weird extension of Europe. So you get an articulation of. Well, let me try this. Before we do the scientific revolution, there's three other revolutions we have to talk about. First is the one I just alluded to with the Lion Man. This is called the Upper Paleolithic Revolution. Now, whether it was a revolution or a transition and blah 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 blah, right? I'm not gonna do that, right? So the point is, there seems to be a fundamental change at a cultural cognitive level in our behavior that it is not explained by sort of an anatomical change. Anatomically, humans are around about 200,000 BCE. That's the most conservative, maybe earlier. But all this huge expanse into behavior that we recognize as prototypically human because of its artistic and technical and symbolic merit comes in the Upper Paleolithic revolution when basically the invention is religion. Then you get the agricultural revolution and eventually, right, and you get the invention of the state, which is a really powerful collective intelligence machine. And then you get another really, really important one. You get civilization lasting for a very long time, and then you get the complete collapse of European, actually all around the Eastern Mediterranean, known as the Bronze Age collapse. All the great empires either collapse or destroyed. It's the biggest loss of civilization in the history of the world, not just of the West. And then what comes out of that is a new revolution, the axial revolution. And the axial revolution was, um, and it was powered by things like in Greece by the invention of um, numeracy, alphabetic, standardized literacy, democracy, which makes people argue with each other a lot. Anyways, there's all this stuff, and what you get is you get this first attempt to understand wisdom not as it was in the Bronze Age, which is about fitting into reality, which is one way of understanding connectedness. But what was emphasized in the axial revolution was no, no, no. Our framing of reality is what is causing all of our suffering. This world is largely illusory, and we have to transcend it in some way. So self-transcendence. And what
John,
happened is,
just a little aside there, John.
yeah.
Why is that called the axial revolution out of interest?
Oh, it was just a term proposed by Karl Jaspers because he proposes that in Greece, ancient Israel, ancient India, ancient China, I would add ancient Persia, the world is changing. It's changing from the way it was organized predominantly during the Bronze Age, where the world is like a continuous cosmos. Um, there's no the difference between human beings and the gods is just a difference of power. If you got powerful enough, you're a god, right? And even time is continuous. It loops on itself. It's continually looping in cycles. And then what you get with the axial revolution is you get the breaking of that one world into two worlds. The everyday world is a world of illusion, or it's decadent, or it's fallen, or it's beset by suffering. And then what we have to do is we have to cultivate wisdom to get to the real world, the upper world, right? You can see how a lot of our religious language has adopted that two worlds orientation, um, and uh, and so it's called axial because it was the idea that like the world turned, obviously not the planet Earth, but the way in which people understood reality fundamentally like turned on its axis. That's why it's an axial revolution.
And the next revolution after the axial one?
So what happens is this gets really worked out in through a long history with the Hebrews. They have an up down two worlds, but they also have a now future two worlds, the promised land. They have a historical, maybe influenced by Zoroastrianism. You have the Platonic one with very much like the Platonic model of the sensible world and the upper world coming out of the cave, right? You get the development of this two worlds mythology, and the Hebrew and the Platonic are brought together in the Christian, and it seems to be this very comprehensive, mytho-philosophical articulation of a worldview that homes all the practices of self-transcendence that were invented in the religious philosophies of the axial period. And this is when all the great world religions are being born, or at least their parents are being born. This is where the Judaism that became the parent religion of Christianity was being born. This is when Taoism is being born. This is when Buddhism is being born. This is when Platonism is being born, etc., etc., etc. And so all of this is hanging together very powerfully. But then what starts to happen is that two worlds starts to come under strain in a really powerful set of criticisms. Um, and Freddie, I don't want to go into this in too great a detail, but let's say it starts in the late Middle Ages, and it picks up steam in the Renaissance, and it really gathers strength in the scientific revolution. And for people who want to see that argument in great detail and more rigor, please go look at that. But what happens in that growing momentum is that the two worlds mythology gets sort of solidified into our more current notions of the supernatural and the natural worlds. And then religion gets understood in that relationship. And then what happens is for sort of philosophical arguments, and then increasingly the emerging of scientific arguments, the supernatural world becomes less and less plausible to people. It becomes less and less believable. And so what happens is the two worlds mythology collapses in a within the scientific worldview. There aren't two worlds. The hallmark of the scientific world is naturalism. There is a universe. There is a unified single reality. Um, Now, the problem with that is that means we took away the cosmic home for all of those ecologies and practices, Buddhism and Taoism and Zen and Christianity and Zoroastrianism and Judaism and Christianity. And yet we can't do without the ecologies of practices that they gave us for dealing with foolishness and a loss of meaning. So what do is you unhome all of these ecologies of practices, secularism rises, and what you have is people can't believe in the two worlds mythology, but they can't live without an ecology of practices for cultivating wisdom and self-transcendence. That's the meaning crisis. It's a wisdom famine. It's a wisdom famine. So I've tried to do as much as I could in a
No,
very
that was
few.
brilliant, John. That was beautifully summarized there. And just an idea that just came to mind there is that scientism, which is the sort of post scientific revolution belief that science will be able to explain everything at some point in the future, just when we get enough data to be able to say it. Was that trying to fill the spot? Because it feels to me
Mm,
that materialist paradigm really believed that it could explain everything, and that in some sense this is why this meaning crisis has lasted so long and taken so long to come out in the wash, because we really did believe this promise. And
mhm.
I just wonder if you have noticed a moment at which that promise sort of began to fail, where actually there were significant fallouts that people started to feel the lack of something. What is it that was lacking? And when do you think it really started to hit home that science just wasn't going to be able to fill this hole?
Excellent. So let's talk about Descartes for one sec, who is the philosophical figure who sort of first groks the scientific worldview and its implications and tries to lay it down. And then he's the godfather of Kant and other people like that. Um, and Descartes did something very important, like you just mentioned it. See, before Descartes, although it's already I don't he doesn't appear out of a vacuum, but they like far before Descartes, like prototypical Augustine, in order to get closer to fundamental reality, you have to go through significant transformation, significant self-transcendence. This is a self-correction that is not just of how you're stringing your propositions or your belief together. It's a transformation at the level of your virtues, like your skills and your states of mind, your states of consciousness, your traits of character. It's a fundamental transformation. And you need to do that if you're actually going to see what's really real. And Descartes dispenses with all of that. He says, no, no, no. All we need is a completely self-correcting universal method, which is a sort of a kind of computational model. And then we don't have to do anything personally. We can just run the model, and it will give us what we really need to overcome the meaning crisis that people are feeling in the midst of the scientific revolution. They're feeling disconnected. They're feeling cut off. Right? You got the Reformation, and the scientific. They're feeling really bereft. And Descartes said, what we can do is we can run this logic machine. That's what a computer is, right? And we don't have to transform. We can just run that and it'll give us certainty. And certainty is how we will be connected back to reality. And the problem with that is well, there's two main problems. First of all, most of your cognition isn't logical propositional. It's being carried by non-propositional ways of knowing. Um, and this has to do with the fact that um, the process of getting So there's a very long, complicated argument here, and just got a paper published. I'm one of the co-authors. Johannes Jaeger is the first author on why relevance realization isn't computation. But here's the sort of gisty, intuitive argument for it. So let me give you a little anecdote about this, and then I'll come back to your question about when. When I was doing formal logic, I you know, I finally realized that the thing that made doing formal logic hard was not formal logic. It was translating well into formal logic. You have to take everyday language and thought and ideas about relevance, and you have to try and cram them into your formal system. And the gist of the argument is, and I will ask people to trust me that there's a like a valid like argument for this, is that that process of formalization, translating things into a formal system, is not itself a formal system. So logic can't be a self-grounding thing. And we wanted it to be. And then what started to happen, to answer your question, is the 20th century started to happen. What started to happen in the 20th century is we started to get all kinds of hints, maybe that's it, clues, signs, right?
Data.
We got Gödel, who tells us, no, you can't ever get a formal system to be both consistent and complete. Sorry, that's impossible. And then we get relativity. No, there isn't absolute space and time. And then we get quantum, right? And then Heisenberg, an uncertainty principle, and light is both a wave and a particle, and all this is. And then you get World War I and World War II, and the hope that reason and science and technology would lead to utopia drenches the world in titanic amounts of blood. And so people go, wait, the Cartesian project is actually, and I'm part of this, like it actually is undermining itself within analytic philosophy, within computational theory, within science itself. And the political machinery, the political technological machinery that was supposed to implement the science is killing tens of millions of people and torturing them and and then you'll say, oh, well, that's not that. And then the defense that people give is no defense at all. It's like, oh, wow, science is value free. It's how you use the science is, well, that's a problem, right? That's a problem that goes back to your belief that knowledge can be acquired without requiring any kind of transformation. And so all of these things, again, a much more complex, rigorous argument is available, but all of these things undermine people's belief that what we can get is we can get this completely formal, logical, deductively closed picture of reality. And what we start to realize is that we have been on the outside of that worldview. We have got scientific explanations, but we don't have scientific explanations of how we do science, of how we make meaning, what truth is in our ontology, etc.
And I can't help thinking in a way that what Descartes hinting there is about a particular type of knowledge and that there are many others.
Yes.
This was brought home in a great interview at the end of this series. Listeners can't wait for you to listen with Marcelo Gleiser, who came up with this, again, very obvious philosophical point, but something that if you don't think about doesn't come naturally, which is that we're not in a sea of knowledge and we slowly extend our island as we learn, because the more we learn, the more that brings up new questions that we then don't know the answers to. And
Yes.
so
Yes.
there isn't this sort of linear approach towards knowing everything as scientists would have had it. And I think there is an important point here about the difference between wisdom, which you've mentioned a lot already, and I think will come up a lot more in this conversation, over just seeking knowledge, and perhaps knowledge in that sort of information sense that Descartes was longing for. And I think now we're still longing for, desperately trying to unite quantum mechanics and general relativity with an information theory. It's perhaps naive. What exactly is the difference, John, between wisdom and knowledge? And
Excellent.
why is wisdom and the pursuit of wisdom so important in this meaning question?
So there's two dimensions about that people typically use, maybe three, for distinguishing wisdom from knowledge. One that seems to be generally convergent idea is that knowledge is what you know, and wisdom is about how you know. And another one is that um, knowledge as we use it has to do about theorizing. It's about generating arguments of propositions that come to conclusions that we accept as probable or sometimes very rarely as certain. Whereas wisdom is not about propositional knowing. Wisdom is about knowing how to do so. So let's talk about the kinds of knowing. There's propositional knowing, which is knowing that, and it gives you beliefs. And it has its own kind of memory called semantic memory. It's where you store in your memory that cats are mammals, even though you'd have no, when did you learn that, where, like, I don't know, it's just there, right? And that's propositional knowing. And it has that sense of truth in which we think, a coherent set of propositions somehow corresponds to the world. Yeah, that's great. But we also know how. That's procedural knowing. This is knowing how to kiss somebody you love when they're sad, right? And this is different. This isn't about beliefs. This is about skills. This is about you managing your sensory motor interaction with the world. And it doesn't, and it has its own kind of memory, prosaically enough, called procedural memory. And its sense of realness is not like your proposition is true, but like your aim is true. What do you mean when your aim is true? Well, it means you've got a set of skills that reliably will manage your sensory motor interaction so you'll get to your goals. And that matters, right? That skillfulness is also an important way in which you sense that you're in touch with reality. Now, the Greeks had two different words. They had episteme for the first, propositional, and they had techne for procedural. But they had more. And let's open it up. Well, how do you know what skill to apply? Like, I bet you know how to swim, and you're not trying to swim right now. Well, this has to do with your perspectival knowing. This is knowing what it's like to be you in this situation right now. And this is knowing by noticing, right? What are you noticing right now? So this is successful attention and awareness to things, foregrounding and backgrounding. And this is your sense of being present. And we sometimes accuse people of not being fully present, or video game people are trying to make people feel present in the game, because this is a sense of realness for us. Um, and that has its own kind of memory too. It's called episodic memory. This is when you remember, like, what did you have for breakfast? Do you remember breakfast this morning? And you go back and you have a little perspective. What was your state of mind, and what was the situation, and how were you sizing it up, and what were you noticing? And that's episodic memory. And the Greeks had a term for that called noesis. And then there's this deepest kind of memory, which is not, this one's harder to explain, but this has to do with the fact that I can only notice things if the world and myself have some primordial relationships. That they've been both shaped so they can fit together. Gibson talked about affordances. So this water bottle is graspable to me. My hand evolved a certain way, and technology, right, shaped the water bottle, and physics shapes the water bottle in my hand, and gravity constrains the water bottle in my hand, etc. And so it's graspable by me. There's a way in which me and the world have been co-shaped by all these shared principles so that we fit together, we belong together. And of course, it's not just the natural world, the cultural world shapes you. You're wearing a shirt. Why are you wearing a shirt? You don't have to, but you're wearing a shirt because the culture shapes you, right? But it also shapes the world to you. You're probably sitting in a room. You're not sitting out in the naked environment. So we're constantly being shaped to the world and shaping the world to us. And that's your participatory knowing. That's knowing by the roles you assume. Like right now, you are a host of a show, and you're assigning a whole bunch of identities, and things are available to you in a certain kind of way, and you belong here in a certain way. There's a certain affinity you have. It's not the same way you would show up. What an interesting word, by the way, is if you were alone with your beloved and seeking an erotic encounter. You would be a different person, yes? And different things would be available and afforded to you. You would feel fitted into the situation in a fundamentally different way. And
John,
that's your
it
Go ahead.
seems to me no coincidence that all of those types of knowledge you've just mentioned, apart from the first one, um, what was the name of the first one, the scientific one?
There's propositional, and the other three
Propositional.
so are procedural, perspectival, and participatory.
It seems no coincidence to me that apart from this first prepositional knowledge, all of those you've just mentioned are all embodied.
Yes,
And I
very
wanted to
much.
ask, is that kind of where we come away from knowledge and we move towards wisdom? Because it seems to me that it is the application within the context of a body in a community, in a natural world, that gives us wisdom over knowledge.
Excellent, excellent. Um, so just to finish off that one thing, and it will help me to answer your question. Your participatory knowing has a unique kind of memory. Also, it's called yourself, and yourself is a very weird thing, right? And so you're knowing by your like you know through the machinery of your selfhood. This is how you know somebody that you're in love with. You know them from yourself. You don't just know them with your awareness or your beliefs or your skills. You know them from yourself, right? And that's called Gnosis, by the way, in Greek. The Greeks have a different term for all these kinds of knowing for a reason. Now that embodiment that you talked about, yes, the procedural, the perspectival, the participatory are all about being embodied. They're being embedded. They're all enacted, right? It's all the 4E cognitive science. And so notice what I'm doing. I'm doing this gesturing in my hand. This is all about how we're connected. It's about how we're connected to our bodies and through our bodies and to each other. And we're connected to each other as bodies, and we're connected to each other as selves, and we're connected to each other as stories. And it could be, right? And blah, blah, blah. It's all this connectedness. And so wisdom is more about how than what. It's about how you are connected. It makes use of all the non-propositional knowing. It's not theoretical. It's the word practical isn't quite right. It's more like, well, I like what you said. It's embodied in this profound way that we're talking about. That's what wisdom is. Wisdom is about a fundamental kind of understanding rather than just a sense of truth. 2 + 2 = 4. Well, you can believe that's true, but you understand that if you can actually know how to balance equations, right? And you understand that, right? You can't use that to understand some things in the world, mathematical relations. They need an even deeper understanding. Think about this. When you really understand something, you don't just have correct beliefs about it. You have appropriate skills directed towards it, skills and habits. You take the right stance towards it, the right perspective, and you you get how it matters to you fundamentally. Like when you really understand something, you're binding all of the kinds of knowing together.
And that's exactly the way it feels. It's sort of the ultimate knowing. It is um the aggregated knowing, which you
Yes,
spoke about last time, this aggregate where we're bringing everything together in a moment. And there isn't a cognitive way of focusing on any one at any one time in this linear way. It's all happening at the same time.
you're doing it right now. You're doing it. Notice what you're doing with your hands. You're
Yes, all
you're
together.
yeah, you're gesturing with your hands. Why? Because your most abstract propositional knowledge, right? I mean, more and more people would argue this, and I think it's very plausibly true. When you're moving around and listen to the language in abstract space, what you're basically doing is just repurposing all that embodied way of navigating and narrating the world. Even the word abstract is to lift up. Transcend is to go over. We balance an equation. Listen to our language. Our language is filled, even our most technical theoretical language is filled with this.
Mhm.
Exactly, exactly.
I want to come back to the word sacred, which came up as we were speaking about religio.
Yes.
And I just want to mention again our much loved colleague Ian McGilchrist,
Oh,
who
yeah.
mentioned in our interview the research that points towards three really really important components to a meaningful life. First was social connection, which we've already spoken about. Second, connection to nature. Again, you know, we're nested in it. Pretty clear on that. And the third was having a sense of the sacred.
Hmm.
As I said, we know the data about the first two, but the last one is a bit harder to pin down, especially in a post scientific revolution world where nobody's quite sure what that really is. Um, you've spoken about the difference between living cognition and intelligence. Is that the living entity cares about the information? Is the
Hmm.
sacred, in some sense, what we care about? And that's why it's important to our sense of meaning? I mean,
Yes.
well, first of all,
Yes.
broadly speaking, how do you define sacred and why is it relevant to the meaning crisis?
So think about just the etymology to get us started to connect to your point. Sacred is related to sacrifice. It's what we're willing to sacrifice other things for. And why do we want to sacrifice other things for that? Because that thing, very neutral use of the word thing here. I don't mean a physical object necessarily, right? That thing, right, gives us our greatest sense of connectedness to ourselves, to other people, and to the world. Um, and so that caring, like this is part of like mattering. So if you ask people, I do this with my students, you know, are you in a romantic relationship? Yes. And do you find it deeply satisfying? Yes. So you weed away all the people who are single. You weed away all the people who are in complicated or falling apart relationships. You find the people who are in happy relationships, which is supposed to be the best thing our culture can offer right now, right? At least that's the sort of BS we're fed by romantic comedies. Um, we shouldn't try to make our romantic relationships carry the burden of God and history and culture. That's unfair to any human being. But back to it. Then you ask these people, how many of you would want to know if your partner was cheating on you, even if it meant the complete destruction of the relationship? 95 to 99% of the people will put up their hand. And then you ask them, why do you want to know this, even if it's going to destroy the relationship? Because it's right. I want the relationship to be real. In addition to whatever we desire that what satisfies our desires is real. Even our most cherished, culturally valued desires depend on the sense that what we are connected to by our desire is real. Now, real is a comparative term. Real is like tall. One thing is real in comparison to something else, right? The shadow is only an illusory stick because I can explain the shadow in terms of the stick, but I can't explain the stick in terms of the shadow. Do you understand? There's the how I make sense of things, meaning how I make sense of things is it has a one-way dependence, and that's why we compare things. Whenever I say something is an illusion, I do that by comparing it to something that's more real. So we're looking for what is real in addition to whatever satisfies our desires, we want it to be real. Real is a comparative. How do you determine, right? What, like, you're going to line up your comparatives. This is more real than this is more real than this is more real than this. And you don't do that in an abstract way. You do that existentially by what things do you sacrifice for other things? Sacredness is what you most care about because it is your trajectory towards what you are placing your bets is the portal, the doorway to what is ultimately real. That will always be a home for you of making sense and of being connected.
So that does a lot to explain why a sense of the sacred plays into awakening from this sort of nightmare
Yes.
of having
Yeah.
lost meaning. I mean, it seems to me that we've replaced religion above all with consumerism. I mean, I think it might have been at first with the scientific promise of knowledge, but actually over time that sort of went away, and it's all that's left is consumerism, the almighty dollar, as my favorite Gil Scott Heron in the television The Revolution Will Be Televised. You maybe know that famous beat poet Gil Scott Heron, who talks about the almighty dollar. But consumerism just doesn't engender meaning, and it doesn't breed wisdom seeking in the way that religious practice used to. How have we replaced religion so far? And has it worked at all, or has it been more maladaptive?
Well, I mean, the problem that we face is consumerism undermines sort of the sacred in two ways. One, as you just noted, it's instrumental. Like you get this in order to get that, in order to get that. Like, what do you want? What, like, you can almost do the Socrates thing. Well, like, why do you want money? Well, I want a car and all the. Well, why do you want that? Well, like, because I want people to think I'm great. Well, why do you want that? And then you push people, and they get to a place where they're trying to. They realize that they need to find something that's inherently meaningful, inherently valuable, not just instrumentally. And consumerism gives you no way of doing that because consumerism depends on the functionality of exchange. And if you can exchange it, it's not inherently valuable, right? Like Elizabeth Oldfield in her, the sacred podcast, she will often ask somebody, what is something you would not give up no matter what the price? Right. And people say, well, like my kids, this is, or something like that. And this is how you start to get your sense of what people are genuinely finding sacred. Think about what people, you can do this, and some religious traditions actually do this as a practice. Imagine you're dying. I just taught everybody the death of Ivan Illich in a course I'm doing on literature of the meaning crisis. What comes to you to give you any sense of comfort? Is it all your possessions? Nope. The thing that comforts people are the real relationships that they have, that they formed, that they are part of. That's what matters, the connectedness. That's what they want. And you can't get connectedness by having things, by having connections, even in social media. What a lie that is. They're replacing connectedness with having connections. Those are just fundamentally different things. Look, having is based around legitimate needs. This is Fromm's work. I have to have oxygen. I have to literally consume it. I have to consume water. I have to consume food. I have to consume shelter. I have to consume medicine. These are legitimate. If I don't do this, I'm dead. Right. So and how do I have things? Well, I have to be able to quickly categorize them. This isn't it. It belongs to a category, and I have to be able to control it, manipulate it, right? Solve problems with it.
But what about the more untouchable side of
But
sacredness, namely our relationship? You talked about that the relationships are what we really, really
well,
value. I can understand that with nature. I can understand that with community. But what about the transcendent? What about the unknown? What about the potential for higher beings or other dimensions or all the stuff that science can't give us an answer to? Is it necessary to have a relationship even with that completely looming and slightly oppressive sense of the unknown? Is that
yes,
also sacred?
yes. Here's why. Because in addition to you having needs, you have developmental needs. Fromm called them being needs. These are needs that are not met by having something. These are needs that are met by becoming. And the prototypical developmental need is the need to mature. All the other thing, I want to be more honest. Yeah, and that's a form of maturation. And notice, by the way, how this is a way of becoming wiser. This is how this is all linked. And why do you want that? Well, because that's how I will more participate in being a real person. This is known as the language people use. Now, what is the hallmark? The hallmark of maturation and how why it's so inadequate in our society. John Rosen, excellent work on this. Maturation is about facing reality. The immature person doesn't face reality. The mature person faces reality. And if you're going to face reality because you are called to development, you are called to become as real a person as you possibly can, you have to face reality. And what are we finding about reality? What were we talking about earlier? The reality has irremovable uncertainty in it. That reality is combinatorially explosively complex, that reality exceeds our grasp, that reality demands maturational transformation from us. We have to face that. And we can't face, and this is not a matter of cultivating beliefs. You don't grow up by cultivating beliefs about adults. You grow up by going through acquiring skills, acquiring new ways of being conscious, acquiring new character traits. You grow up by becoming wiser. And if you face reality with increasing wisdom, you see that reality fundamentally exceeds your grasp. You face relevance realization. You face uncertainty principles. You face that you can't get a formal system that's simultaneously consistent and complete. You face the fact that reality is inexhaustible. As we answer questions, we get a manifold of new questions emerging. All of these things that we've been talking about, it's all points towards the same thing. Reality is irredeemably, irresolvably complex beyond your growth. But it's not hostile. Every time you grow, it gives you the resources to grow again and to grow
And
again.
and do you think a humility in the face of that unknown, just having that enormous space to transcend into, as it were, to come from your past in the known, heading forward, transcending into the unknown, is that part of the solution here? I feel like our lack of humility, this sort of narcissism, this like we're at the center of the world. This is another thing that I thought you might mention about ways we've replaced the sacred and the religion, and the way we've replaced religion is that we've replaced it narcissistically, that we are the sort of Uberman, we are the new God, and
Yes,
the sort of the ones who know everything. And I feel that this lack of humility, when it comes down to brass tacks and we introspect and we look in there and we know damn well that that's not enough to give us a sense of meaning, I think that's part of the crisis.
definitely. I think that's definitely right. I think, and there's a lot of like the way consumerism is looped in with social media, which is looped in with keeping people like perpetually immature and removing older people from our cognitive awareness and our consciousness and
The
creating
elders,
all, all,
absolutely.
all kinds of false bullshit about perpetual youth, or living forever, which is exactly the desire of immaturity. And so all of that is right. You're right. People say I'm not religious. That usually means there's a religion of narcissism going on in some way. That's very frequently the case. I agree with you on that. Um, but what is that based on? Well, that's based on that the machinery of sacredness is fundamentally bound to egocentrism. What's egocentrism? It's perspectival immaturity. It's right. It's the lack of perspectival knowing how to take other people's perspectives and genuinely like living out of those perspectives, etc. Yeah, this is all linked together. But there's two. Think about it. And this goes back to the sacred. Epistemic humility, hallmark of wisdom, by the way, hallmark of wisdom. A defining feature of a wise person, sorry, the defining feature of somebody who's not wise is they'll say, oh, by the way, I'm wise. Know that. Socrates, I know that I don't know. Like epistemic humility is a hallmark of wisdom because you don't finish or complete maturity. That doesn't make any sense. So I thought like it's not like the way you finish a meal. That's the wrong way of thinking. It's not give up consumerism.
We got distracted by my suggestion on consumerism there. Obviously, you do agree with me. Is there anything else we've replaced religion with that may have had its own sort of weird maladaptive, kind of
Yeah.
mutation?
Well, I want to pick up on that, and I'll tie it to what I just said. We've lost epistemic humility, but we've also lost wonder. See, wonder is what curiosity is the having mode. You're trying to find something that you need, or what's that, or how could I use that? Wonder is when you call yourself and your world into question, when you open it up, when you're really trying to face a reality beyond your grasp. That's wonder, right? And we've replaced wonder with spectacle. We've replaced wonder with spectacle. So not only do we have, right, we have the narcissism and the consumerism and a kind of arrogant attitude towards reality, an anxious arrogant. We've also replaced wonder with spectacle. We go and we get things that are spectacular and blockbuster. Do they make you wonder? Do they make you wonder? Do they make you seriously question whether or not you're living as you should? And right, and notice when you if you put wonder and humility together, you get reverence. And reverence is oriented towards what? The sacred. And when you lose the sacred, you lose that which trains humility and wonder together, and you lose the two things that are the hallmarks of wisdom. Wisdom begins in wonder. Socrates. I do not know. Epistemic humility. See, without the sacred, the cultivation of wisdom and that deep connectedness is lost. And we replace it, like you said, with consumerism and narcissism, or the shadow side of it, a kind of angry nihilism, or we replace the wonder with spectacle and entertainment and super salience that has no depth. That's what a lot of social media is.
Interesting. And John, there's one last point I want to get on to before we get sort of deep into the practices. I want to, really spend some time going deep into not only the sort of psychology, but also the neuroscience and what's happening in the body and in the brain of these practices. But first, I just want to take a sidestep into this slightly sticky area. And listeners, I understand how sticky the area of gender is at the moment. And I understand that in the next few minutes, we're also not going to be talking about the trans side of things because it's all coming out sort of quite recent. We have very little research into these areas. So apologize in advance to the listeners about speaking about men and women in a binary way here. But I think it's important to the history. So the male version of this meaning crisis is what I wanted to mention. And a lot has been said, very rightly so, about women's mental health recently.
Mm-hmm.
Me Too has started what's going to be a very long process of healing. And I think it's been a very, very strong and beautiful start. But much less is being said about the other elephant in the room, which is men's mental health. Now, in the last series, I did an interview with the brilliant Jungian scholar James Hollis on the shadow.
Oh, I love Hollis. Yeah.
And he said that men's disconnection from their inner world of meaning and values, presumably by some sort of rock like resilience role that they were trying to fill, has caused massive psychological damage to men. He's even made a little film about it with a filmmaker, which will help us to face this uncomfortable truth. And I'll pop that in the show notes if anyone's interested, listeners. So it could be argued that this dissociation, this sort of inauthenticity, could be partly responsible for the great patriarchal malpractices that we see from the last few hundred years. Biodiversity destruction, physical, verbal abuse, war, genocide, systemic inequality, narcissistic greed. I mean, all symptoms, I would say, of the modern era. Do you think there's a connection between the meaning crisis for men in particular and this massive plethora of terrible things that we've allowed to come to the fore on our watch? Sorry, I know
Yeah.
it's really
Oh no,
loaded.
no. I think so. Um, I mean, there's biological things probably at work. Men tend to be at the tail of distributions. The women are clustered a little bit more towards the mean in most of the distributions, cognitive distributions, personality distributions, and that's probably sort of evolutionary benefit. Men can explore sort of the extremes, and women who provide a center stability. Um, that's overly simplistic. But I don't want to, because we're talking about embodiment, I just wanted to briefly mention that the body has a role in this. And I know this is, and you and I are not going to get into all of the stickiness around that. one thing I would recommend is, however we want to talk about gender and other things like that, if we get into a disembodied way of talking about it, as if we and what we are can float free from our embodiment, I think that is making things much, much worse. We need to figure out how to talk about all of this. And I don't see people making a very good progress on this, by the way. We need to know how to talk about this in a way that is reverential, and I use that word deliberately, given what I just said, towards our embodiment. So I just want to put that in here. I'm not a biological determinist or anything like that, but I'm saying this that we that has to be part of the equation. Now, given that, um, I think men have traditionally had roles that put them into the extremes. Um, in and the problem for men is those roles have largely disappeared, or they only survive in a way of neglect. Um, so, a prototypical example is hunting, right? I mean, there are societies where women hunt. There are no societies where men don't hunt. There are many societies where women don't hunt, and there are some societies where men and women hunt. But so if you put them all together, on average, men are doing what way more hunting, like cross culturally, cross historically. Hunting is very dangerous, right? It's extremely dangerous. It's extreme behavior, but it also brings extreme rewards, right? If you got right, so the thing is, you might die and you're going to fail a lot, but when you succeed, you get a lot of food. Now think about the mythologies wrapped around hunting and then related things like war. And I'm not trying to justify any of these things. I don't eat mammals, for example. I'm just making a point here, right? And so we sort of we created these heroic mythologies around men as people who leave home and go out into the extremities, the wildernesses, and it's a conquest mentality, and it's problematic. And we do all of this as a way of managing that need for things like hunting and plausibly warfare and other things. Now we usually think about the Greek myths. They counterbalance the heroic myth of the hero with the hubris myth, which is don't try to be a god. Don't try to be a god. Right? You always have you're always a mortal, and if you try to be a god, hubris, you'll be destroyed. And of course, Greek tragedy is filled with these characters. Oedipus is a classic example, right? Now, what happens with the advent of the science technological revolution is, first of all, those roles disappear. I don't hunt. I imagine you don't. I go to a grocery store to get my food. Um, I don't. I've never had to go to war. Some people have, and I'm grateful that they have done that. I'm not besmirching that. Uh, but many men don't go to war. Many, right? Notice how we think of those jobs that are close to those extremities as more prototypically male. It's not saying women can't do them, but like, fire person and police officer and things like that. But as we moved into the technological society, right, that the concrete expression of that, in which reality actually acts as a check on your hubris, is removed. And now we can be the corporate the corporate tycoon who has unchecked
And
hubris.
and how my feeling again, I was hoping you could confirm that I'm not wrong here, John. My feeling is that that's left a vacuum and that men are a bit lost. They're hugely, or at least the progressive side of this debate is hugely behind and supportive and in agreement with the sort of equalization in those roles between men and women, in this, as you say, this exporting to technology and sort of white labeling out to institutions of taking care of all of those things that would lead them to be more sort of, stereotypically man-like and violent and all of these things.
Yes.
But the question might be, has there been a healthy collective intelligence led emergence of a new sort of form of meaning and role definition for men? Or is this part of the problem that you identified?
So yeah, I mean, here's the thing. I just you pause and ask the question really, really carefully. How, I'm going to ask two questions. How could, as a man, how could I be heroic? Is there a way to even land that isn't silly, that isn't sexist? And what is the difference between being a good man and being a good person? Because presumably both men and women can be good persons. Right. Now, if you travel back in time, and I'm not saying we should, I'm against nostalgia, you would get fast answers to those questions. We don't have answers to those questions. And so we are in some ways, we have this biological machinery that is hanging around looking for work. And we have role models that are being reconstructed, again, as you said, not without good reason. I'm trying to be very careful here, so that they are not specific to masculinity. They are about just being a good person. And then what do we do? What do we do? And that is very much a vacuum. This is why, this is why hero mythology is so big. And then when Hollywood tries to mess with the hero mythology and, for whatever reason, make, the Marvel universe or the DC universe, more equal or more diverse, people get all upset. Not because they're opposed to those things in terms of social justice, it's because they're losing what they wanted from those stories, which is for 2 hours, they can be a hero. And for 2 hours, they can go into extreme situations. And look, pay attention, right? Men went in droves to those movies. Women didn't go very much. And when they changed them, men stopped going and women still didn't go. That's a mistake, right? And so this vacuum is a dangerous one. Like the Nazis came out of a masculinity, back to nature, heroic masculinity kind of thing. Like it's a dangerous vacuum to leave unaddressed. Um, Now
I mean,
this goes.
we're gonna
Go ahead.
get onto solutions very, very shortly, listeners. So we
Yeah.
can maybe sort of hold out on thinking about what we do about that vacuum, John. But the last, obviously, it wouldn't be due diligence to ask if there wasn't something, a corresponding crisis following post-Enlightenment changes for women. I mean,
Yes.
I can't help thinking, this wonderful post-feminist world we find ourselves in is actually worse for women because now the men are still shit at doing all of the stuff that they used to do. And we're slowly getting better. I'm certainly doing my best. But they also have to go out and work and do all of the stuff that men traditionally had to do. Is there a corresponding meaning crisis in women as far as you can see?
I think so. I mean, so as women have moved into the marketplace and the political arena, as they should, I really want to be clear that people keep the distinction between an explanation and a justification, right? Right. And as they should, they've, of course, entered into arenas that tend to individualize, atomize us, put us into an instrumental frame of mind, undermine the connectedness, social connectedness, connectedness to the body that are so central to meaning. And women had traditionally carried that role, of course, because they bear children literally in an embodied way. They carry them within them, and then they carry them next to their bodies, uh, and we could ask the same question now of women. What is it to being a good woman that is different than just being a good person? If you say, and because again, you do have a biology that's for many women waiting around to do work. I'm not saying women are meant to, like, women lives are meaningless if they don't have children or anything like that. But if you don't have a child, if you're not entering into a mothering relationship, what is it you're doing that distinguishes you from men? And what is it that gives you that kind of connectedness that has always been something that women have traditionally defended and talked about? And so you get the fact that women are now starting to show a lot of the pathologies that used to be specific to men. And women used to live longer than men, even though they bore children, right? If they didn't die in childbirth, which was a serious risk, I should say. But, as women take up smoking and drinking and stressful work schedules and all the stuff, and social isolation and status seeking and being stabbed in the back because they're in an extremely competitive world, etc., their health is declining. And their health is declining, and they don't have the family connections. And many of them, there's a longing to have children. Men have that too, but it's different for women, I believe, at least the women I've talked about and read about. And so it's unclear, again, how they should answer this question. What is it to being a good woman that is unique from or above and beyond just being a good person? And they don't have a clear answer anymore.
But John, perhaps, and I mean, so I'm slightly playing devil's advocate because I don't really believe this, but perhaps what you said is part of this process, this idea that actually we're not talking about what's a men's sense of meaning or a women's sense of meaning anymore. We're just talking about equality. We're talking about person's sense of meaning, and that should be the same for everybody. And I was so shocked. It got me thinking so deeply in the transhumanism episode when um, I can't remember his name right now, but it was fascinating. We were talking about the ethics of transhumanism, and he said
Yes.
very shortly, the word gender will have absolutely no meaning whatsoever, and it will be just all on a single sort of parameter of singular. Could it be that he's got a point there that actually we're heading towards personhood rather than manhood or womanhood? And that's exactly why this vacuum is being left so wide open, because we haven't yet assimilated that.
So I think there is something very spiritually and morally valuable about prioritizing being a good person over and above being a good man or being a good woman or a good friend. Um, uh, I, I think that's right, and I think that's so. I want to say that because I don't want to lose that point. Uh, I do wonder though about this notion of personhood that now, and this was my earlier concern, is now swinging free of our embodiment and our biology. And I'm worrying about a kind of Gnosticism in which what we're doing is we're proposing a kind of utopic mythological liberation from our biology and our embodiment. And that is just the Cartesian nightmare come back full circle. It's like, no, you're giving up all of what we've been talking about the non-propositional kinds of knowing and all the embodied and embedded and connected, and the fact that we're woven into the world with our evolutionary history and our cultural history. And so I think there's a real danger of hubris in that kind of um, Gnostic framing of this.
Mm.
Um, it's
Okay,
like
John.
I yeah, I
So,
don't want to lose that. I don't want to lose our embodiment.
mm, so let's move on to the solutions. One of the methods you propose for us to awaken from this meaning crisis, I love the way you use the word awaken here, is a focus on embodied practices, the
Hmm.
the, the doing and the experiencing rather than just the saying or the thinking, which is so
Yes.
often our way, particularly on podcasts. Um, the important learning opportunity of direct experience over just logically reflecting on concepts. After all, our cognition is deeply linked to the fact that we have bodies and that we have feelings, which we spoke about last time, and that guides how we map the outside
Yep.
world, how
Yep.
we interact with it. So I want to bring in this important idea here from of embodied cognition, brought to the fore originally by your colleague Evan Thompson, among others,
Yes.
in the early 90s. You mentioned Evan last time in connection with his deep continuity concept, bridging mental and physical
Yep.
processes. Can't
Totally.
wait to speak to Evan about that. Hopefully,
Is he
Evan.
coming on your show?
I hope he's coming on soon. I don't want
Yeah,
to
he,
miss
he was
anything for
just
the
on my show. He was just on my channel. I love talking to Evan. Yeah.
So Evan was one of the inspirations for the embodied cognition movement. I know the movement influenced your thinking
A
alongside
lot.
all of the other four E's and the
Yes.
fifth one of emotion of Damasio. So I was hoping you could use this idea of embodied cognition as a kind of window into why your ecology of practice solution is such a compelling way to solve this crisis.
Right. So it goes back to everything we've been saying about wisdom and meaning. They're not carried primarily or even uh, uh, yeah, I'll just say it that way. They're not carried primarily by our propositional knowing. They're carried by our procedural, our perspectival, and our participatory. And as you exclaimed earlier on, but those are all embodied. Yes, they are. And you really, really, if you want to mature, you have to cultivate virtue. Virtue isn't following a rule. In fact, many people make a distinction between virtue ethics and rule-based ethics. Think about what a virtue like honesty is. Of course, it requires you having believing certain things, but it also requires you having a whole bunch of skills. You being able to take certain perspectives and you being able to assume certain roles. Do you hear all of the non-propositional kinds of knowing in there? If I'm going to be honest, like, because honest to you isn't the same kind of honesty to a 4-year-old, or kindness to you isn't the same kind of kindness I show to my son or to my romantic partner. That would be creepy and weird, right? Right. So what we're doing when we are trying to cultivate wisdom, when we're trying to mature, when we're trying to face reality, when we're trying to transform so we are more connected to it, is we are deeply engaging the embodied aspects of our being. And that means we have to practice. We have to practice in a way that engages all of those non-propositional knowing and engages them in a way that's coherent, that makes them not act in conflict, but act coherently, in alignment, and that and we have to do that by understanding also that it can't be a single practice. I say there's no panacea practice. That's because all of your cognition, again, remember, is this very complex, multi-level, multi-dimensional, self-correcting system. You have to create a complex, multi-dimensional, self-correcting system of practices in order.
That's why you use the analogy of an ecology, right?
Exactly. That's the ecology of practice. That's what religions do. Take a look at any religion. There's an ecology of practices, and they generally fall into sort of 4 domains. This is work that I've done with Nathan Vanderpool and Taylor Barrett and Christopher Mastropietro and other people. So you want embodied practices like we're talking about. These are practices that really deal with your embodiment, and they're very participatory. You want practices that are mindful, that deal with your perspectival. Notice what you're doing in mindfulness practice. You're shutting off the propositional knowing, and you're trying to go into pure perspectival knowing, pure awareness of awareness. And that's really, really important because that empowers your ability to notice and to see through illusion and to have insight. Listen to the word insight. Right? You need imaginal practices. You need practices that make use of the imagination. Like, so you mentioned Hollis and other people, right? Uh, like, think about the difference between the Corbin's distinction between the imaginary and the imaginal. Imaginary is when I make a mental picture and I look at it in my mind, like imagine a sailboat, and you can do that. Imaginal is when you look through an image at the world and back through the image at yourself. When a child is playing, which is a primary developmental thing they do, child is playing at being Superman. They're not looking at an image of Superman. They're looking at the world through Superman's eyes, and they're looking back at themselves through Superman's eye, and they're trying on various skills and virtues and perspectives and character traits. That's the imaginal, and you need that. The imaginal is deeply, deeply important to maturation, to growth. Ritual is imaginal, serious play. And then dialogical. You need the kind of thing that Socrates exemplifies. You need those conversations that take on a life of their own, and they take all the people that are involved to a place that they couldn't get to on their own and open them up to a deeper reality. Yes.
Exactly. And just to interrupt there, John, before we go any further, can you just remind the listeners about the importance of dialogical over merely monological knowledge structures? Because
Yes.
this
Yes.
emerged out of this sort of collective intelligence dynamism, this mammalian history that we learn as a group rather than isolation. And it's probably going to be quite important to this ecology of practices, right? It's dialogical, it's amongst, it's collective.
Yeah. So this is work of Mercer and Sperber in their book, The Enigma of Reason. I can't remember the author right now, but an amazing book, the Dialogical Roots of Deduction, just an astonishing book, and a whole bunch. Just give you one example. You take a standard reasoning task, the Waitian selection task. You get very bright people in the university, educated, obviously high in intelligence. You give them this very simple task. Reliably, only 10% get it right, 90% get it wrong because they fall prey to confirmation bias and all this other stuff. Um, Now you replace that with four people told to work together, right? That's an important. There has to be this working together. This has to be shared spirit, like a team spirit, right? You tell them to work together, and the success rate goes from 10% to 80, 82% reliably. And this is one example of many things. And here's a second thing about this. Many people might have heard of that. The second thing is really important. So what you can do with the experiment is you can actually break it up into stages. You can have people try to do the task individually and then put them into a group. And then what you can do is find people who got the right answer individually and see if that's predictive of the group getting it, right? So, because one model you might have is, well, all that's happening is one person figures it out and then just convinces everybody else to adopt it. Here's what the data clearly, reliably show that's not the case, because one person having the answer is neither necessary nor sufficient for the group coming up with the right answer. It is something that the group, as a group, generates dialogically. We are not fundamentally monological thinkers. We are not primarily monological self-correctors. This is why the self-help movement is a very dangerous thing. We need other people. You are my best chance for me to transcend myself, and I am your best chance. We need dialogical practices.
And there's another point here on dialogical practices because they're embodied. We might think, oh, debate, intellectual exchange, that is not separate from the body. And we must remember that dialogue is also embodied, right, John?
Well, in fact, when we're doing the practice, the dialectic into Dialogos, we emphasize people noticing, paying attention to the embodied. We'll say, like, you did this gesture, you made a fist with your right hand. Go back, live in that. What's going on there? Besides your words, what was going on there? Because we know that gesture is doing something above and beyond what you're saying and solving problems above and beyond what you're saying.
Mm.
And so go back to the gesture. Or you keep using this metaphor of opening up. Slow down, go back. Stand inside that metaphor. Tell me what's going on there. Open it up. And what this does is it moves people away from trying to get the right answer, because the practice is oriented around a particular virtue. What is courage? What is honesty? It orients them towards getting into right relationship with themselves, each other, the shared spirit, and all of that in right relationship to the virtue itself.
Great, John. Well, I mean, that for me really sets the context for these embodied practices. And I really want to just spend the rest of the interview zooming in on a few of these practices. And I want to start with flow states because you've thought a lot about it been hugely inspired by it, written extensively about it. I'm going to try and say his name now. The research of Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi. I can never get it right.
Csikszentmihalyi.
Csikszentmihalyi. And I know you've been hugely inspired by this phenomena. Tell us briefly what it is, the conditions for it, the brain features, the benefits, and also the types of practices that cause it.
Right. So the flow state is that state of where you're completely absorbed in some task you're doing because the demands of the task slightly exceed your skills. So you've got to really give everything to stay in the task. So, a very clear example, you're sparring with someone in martial arts. Like if the person is like as good as you or even slightly better, you've got to be fully, notice the language I'm going to use. You have to be fully present, right? In order to properly access all of your skills and take the right perspectives, et cetera, show up in the right way, right? And so what happens in that situation is uh, a bunch of things happen. People feel tremendously at one with their environment. That sense of connectedness, religio, is intensified. So one of the things that very plausibly predicts how meaningful people find their lives is how frequently they flow if the flow state is it flows in domains they consider significant or important. So if you're flowing in video games, that's not going to do much. But if well, I'll use myself as an example. If I'm getting into the flow state when I'm lecturing and educating other human beings in a way they find valuable, that is tremendously meaningful for me, as you can imagine. So you get this tremendous sense of at-one-ment, that nattering, egocentric nanny in your head. How am I doing? What are people thinking of me? What's my power? What's my status? How am I doing? How's my hair? Am I ugly? Are people sexually attracted to me? How am I doing? How am I doing? How are people thinking? That falls away. That falls away. It falls completely silent. It's like in the depths of meditation. And although, especially in hot flow, you may be exerting a lot of metabolic energy, it feels effortless. It feels graceful. Like if you're sparring as a martial artist, your hand is just going up and it blocks the strike that's coming. Like it's not like you're passive, but it's not like you're making it happen either. You are, and this is Platonic, you are fully participating in it. It's profound participatory knowing.
And
And you're,
and so discovering that flow state and how to get into it, why is this a solution to the meaning crisis?
well, in and of itself, because there's no panacea practice, I
Uh,
wouldn't say it
I mean,
is.
one of many, of course.
One of many. Okay, good. Well done. Because what it does is it demonstrates in an undeniable manner. Look, people find the flow state optimal in two ways. They think of it as one of the very best kinds of experiences they can have, and they are at their best. This is why athletes and martial artists seek to get into the flow state. Okay, so this is something they can't deny this because they're at their best and they're doing their best, right? Okay, and what does it tell you? Think about the stuff it tells you. It tells you, first of all, the power of the non propositional, that power of that dynamic connectedness to the world. Like you're really relying on your procedural, your perspectival, and your participatory knowing. That's why I was flagging all those terms, right?
Mhm.
When it silences that nattering thing, it's silencing egocentrism. It's silencing the lie that your agency depends on your egocentrism.
I want to
Because,
come back to that in a minute. I want to
yeah,
put a question. Once we introduce these practices, I've got a question about the default mode network, which I think happens to be the locus of what you just mentioned. Okay, next, I'm really interested in listening as a practice, as more than just a passive waiting to speak, but actually as an action with specific intent. And I spoke to Stephen Porges about this, saying that I think there should be some serious scientific research into the mental health outcomes of being heard, of being witnessed, and of listening in general. Now, a practice that you've been exploring in this area of listening is the methodology of circling.
yes.
Tell us what's listening, why is listening important for you personally? And then give us a bit of detail on circling.
So circling, well, I'll do it the other way around because Circling is, my good friend Guy Senstock and my good friend Taylor Barrett introduced me both. Guy is one of the inventors of uh, circling. And circling is one of the things that we practice in order to enable people to go into what we call dialectic into dialogos. Dialectic into dialogos is not just sitting down having a conversation. So let's talk about what you just said. You want to practice listening, active listening, receptive listening. So one of the things we get people to do is they have to paraphrase. You say something to me and I have to paraphrase it back. And I do that until you say, "Oh, you got me. You finally heard me." And I have to be mindful, aware of why wasn't I getting it? Why wasn't I hearing it? I also want to replace asking interesting questions with asking interested questions. Instead of trying to show how smart I am and trying to steer things into, I try to ask a question that's going to draw you out the way Socrates would draw people out. Educe, education comes from educe, which means to draw out. It doesn't mean to put in, it means to draw out. And so I'm going to try and draw you out. Now, if you do that, right, you're drawn out, you'll start to disclose yourself. If you feel that you're being genuinely listened to, this is what circling trains. You'll start to open up and disclose more of yourself. And if I ask you that right, if I listen the right way and I paraphrase you and ask interested questions and point out to you your gestures, and I'm doing all of this, and you're being drawn out, and then I am being drawn in, right? I'm opening myself, making myself more and more in service to you. What's happening is you're disclosing yourself more and more. I'm disclosing myself more and more. In this really challenging and demanding manner, we get into a shared flow state. And it's a shared flow state in which we are reciprocally opening to each other. And when human beings reciprocally open to each other, they start to love each other. I don't necessarily mean romantically. I might mean like in philia, like in the word philosophy. You get that shared love of something that's going on. You both say, "I'm loving this process and I'm loving you in this process. I'm loving myself." It sounds like a Hallmark card when you say it. But what you can do with these practices, right, is you can integrate like that interpersonal connection from circling, the platonic questioning and questing and wondering and humility and the flow state, and you can draw them all together, and people start to have this, like I said, they start to get into this profound sense of deep connectedness.
Now, next, mindfulness meditation and movement meditation, both big parts of your
Yep.
ecology of practices and also of your personal life, John. Big themes of this show as well. Listeners, we've got a whole episode on the psychology of meditation with Shauna Shapiro. If anyone wants to deep dive into the psychology and neuroscience research that's been done on meditation. And it's also central to your work. So tell us what happens in the brain and in the body during these meditation practices, and how can it help us rediscover our connectedness, both to our bodies and to everything around us, and and the people and the spaces around us.
Yeah, I mean, everything I'm going to, well, everything I'm going to say about this is controversial in the scientific sense, not in the political media sense. Uh, Well, one of the things you're doing, of course, in meditation is you're training your attention in different ways that are very, very important, and you're enhancing. So I'll talk about it cognitively. You're enhancing your ability. You're enhancing a really central ability called cognitive flexibility. So cognitive flexibility is, think about what that example. You thought she was angry, and you sort of framed it that way. But what did you have to do? You had to break that frame. That's really important. And meditation really helps break frame. These are practices for frame breaking, really massively stepping back and looking at your framing and pulling them apart and breaking them. But that's not enough. I have to come up with a better frame. Oh, she's actually afraid. And contemplative practices like metta, right, where you're practicing how you're connected to the world and people beyond you, right? They train that frame making. And when you train them together, you enhance cognitive flexibility. And when you enhance cognitive flexibility, you make people more prone to insight. You make them more capable of breaking habits. You make them more capable of undergoing transformation. You basically empower them for virtue and wisdom in a really important way. So that's what's sort of happening cognitively. What's happening, and this is probably related to the fact that something like flow is going on in meditative and contemplative practices, is the usual patterns of connectivity in the brain seem to be shutting down or being altered in important ways. So the default mode network that dominates a lot of our everyday thinking, which does a lot of our mind wandering, is being sort of silenced in an important way. We stop talking to ourselves and we stop daydreaming. I mean, meditation is in some ways a struggle against talking to yourself and daydreaming. And you're trying to get out of that because you're trying to shift a priority, like again, like in the flow state, to a demand of being connected to something, either your breath, if it's a focused meditation, or open awareness, or in contemplation, the marks of existence or other people, etc. And so what's happening in the brain is you're actually shifting around um, um, patterns of activity, and you're sort of opening up the possibilities of new patterns of connectivity within the brain and between the brain and the body, and then between the brain, body, and the world, opening up. So, for example, just one clear example, there's an area in your brain called the insula. Okay. So the insula has to do with interoception, not introspection, interoception. Interoception is your sense of what's going on in your body. And that is actually enhanced frequently when people are meditating. But the insula is actually what you do in order to pick up on other people's mental states. So by sort of up regulating, sort of training the insula because you're training interoception, you actually increase your ability to have insight into other people's mental states, which can actually afford and empower compassion. When you're meditating, and this initially people were like, why your cerebellum is firing like crazy, but you're not moving or balancing, you're sitting still and stable. Why is your cerebellum? Because the loop between your cerebellum and your frontal cortex is being trained, because you're trying, and in a way, and what does that do? That enhances cognitive flexibility. It reorganizes. So there's all these kinds of things going on. There's a much richer picture. I'm just trying to give people a quick taste.
That makes an awful lot of sense, doesn't it? And it brings me back to that question that I had about the DMN, the default mode network region of the brain. Now, when I was chatting with David Luke of Greenwich University, a psychologist at Greenwich University, in the Altered States episode, he spoke about the research on the DMN that shows that this part of the brain, which is traditionally associated with our sense of self and that
Yes.
the voice in our heads that we associate with ourselves, that it was significantly lowered during meditation,
Yes.
during flow states, during hypnagogic states, and also during psychedelic experiences, which is obviously David Luke's sort of specialization. But he was saying all of these
Yep.
different states show a significant reduction in the activity in the DMN. Do you think that that's meaningful? The fact that what's associated with our sense of ego self, the narrative that you spoke about before, the narcissistic voice. Do you think there's something in that? Why these practices seem to do so well to increasing our sense of meaning and belonging and connectedness? Is it a coincidence? It can't be.
It's not. I would argue, and this is an excellent question. So, 2 points. The first is maturity is about turning from egocentrism to ontocentrism, being centered on reality, facing reality. And that's important. The developmental needs, where we get most of our sense of meaning, are needs of maturation. Secondly, meaning in life is about being connected to something beyond yourself. This is this is one of the central features. It's called mattering and significance. You want to be connected to something that has a reality and a value beyond your egocentric existence and preferences. That's why you want to know if your partner's cheating on you. even if it would destroy this relationship that's so ego gratifying to you, right? So think about this. These three questions are what you can ask to determine how much meaning in life you have. What do you want to exist even if you don't? How real is it? How much of a difference do you make to it? How connected are you to it? This is why children are so meaningful to people. Do you want your kids to exist even if you don't? You bet. That's the whole project, right? Are they real? Yeah, they're some of the most real things, real entities in my existence, my children. Do you make a difference to them? If I'm a good parent, I hope I do. I want to be really connected to them in a way that makes them flourish. That's why children are so meaningful. Meditation turns you from egocentrism to ontocentrism and makes available the connectedness, those connectedness to something beyond or bigger. These are all metaphors, beyond or bigger than yourself, that are the central engines of meaning in life. There's a direct relationship between what meditation does in shutting off, well, or at least shutting down the default mode network and egocentrism, because it affords us maturation in the kind of connections to things beyond us that give us meaning in life.
Mm. Well, the last embodied practice I wanted to speak to you about is one that I know you've practiced for many, many years in several forms, Tai Chi, Qigong,
Yep.
several
And
others. Now, I practiced for many years, but not consistently like you. So I can't speak from your level of experience, but I have felt its effects very, very strongly when I did practice. And I wanted to ask a cognitive scientist who had this experience themselves, what the hell's going on? Um, when I started Tai Chi, sorry, Qigong, so that's the more static form, listeners. There's
yeah.
hardly any movement at all. It felt like I was having an internal shower, that I
Mhm.
was washing away tension internally, feeling it flow out of me and allowing various parts of my body to sort of communicate with each other. And the flow of this chi, as the Taoists call it, causes your hands to tingle as if they're electrically charged,
Mhm.
for the palms to actually physically heat up. Now, apart from that, which in itself is pretty extraordinary phenomenologically, the meridian system advocated by Chinese medicine, which connects various points on the surface of the body with various internal organs, has now been proved to be medically effective with acupuncture, and so is now available on the National Health Service in many, many countries. Yet I feel, John, that the scientific implications of this validation haven't really been integrated into our medical worldview. So the reason I've always wanted to ask a qigong teacher like you on the show to talk about this scientifically is I want to understand, what are the implications for that phenomena, that sort of electric kind of phenomena, for the nature of the body and the nature of embodiment, so the experience of that. In your opinion, John, what's the takeaway from something so clearly causally active as the vital energy that's generated in Qigong or redirected in acupuncture? Maybe give us some examples from your practice to illustrate your opinion.
I'm actually working on a paper with Jensen Kim, who I mentioned earlier, on a naturalistic explanation of qi.
Oh, great! Because I just really think this is lacking out there in the
It
in the
is.
literature.
It is. Um, So you have to be careful about these electricity metaphors. They're actually not original to the Chinese culture. Like, for example, if you do the history of Reiki, the metaphors are actually often music and connection metaphors, and then they sort of circle through Europe and North America, and they come back as magnetism and electricity metaphors. And so I would sort of put those metaphors aside because I think um, they're not really phenomenologically or historically helpful. Um, Now, I think you can get a lot of what's going on out of this, and I'm gonna. This is a long argument too. If you put together a few things that we've talked about, you're embodied, which right, which means that it's much more correct to say that your mind is between you and the world than it is within you. This is what all of this, what we've been talking about, actually means. So first of all, there's that connectivity, and it's neither subjective nor objective because it's a way in which you and the world fit together. So I've coined that term transjective. It's this connectivity between, right? This transjective connectivity between you and the world. So first of all, you get that, and then you have that. So much of your way of being connected to the world is imaginal. Let me just give you a quick, non-controversial example. So I can ask you to do mathematics in your head, right? Like 32 times 2. You can do it in your head, right? That space inside your head, is that a literal space? No. Is it a mere fiction? No, because that space actually allows you to become aware of your cognition. It gives you metacognition. It makes you rational. So it's neither literal nor merely fictional. It's imaginal. You look through that space into your mind, which is really, really weird. So a lot of you and your way of connecting to yourself and the world is imaginal, and your mind is much more transjective than subjective. And then when you're doing things like Qigong and Tai Chi, you're getting into the flow state. So you're getting this flow state in a very powerful way that is giving you a deep sense of connectedness, a deep sense of discovery. It's changing your interoception. That's why you get the weird tinglings and all, and it's altering your sense of connectedness, and it's doing that in an imaginally augmented way. It's serious play. You don't do Tai Chi Chuan. The verb in Chinese is play, like you play music. It's serious play. And so you get this imaginally augmented sense of your embodied connectivity that is actually some of the fundamental reality of who and what you are. And it doesn't fall cleanly into our subjective, objective categorization scheme of Descartes. And so it's amazing and astonishing. And it can connect mind and body and world in ways that fall outside of that kind of mechanical framework, the Cartesian version of it, and can be very healing and transformative. Yes.
But the meridian system of that acupuncture is using, one of the rare examples we have that we know it works, but we don't know why. We've got something similar with EMDR research. We've got a great episode on that, listeners, where we know that it works. They're getting incredible results. It's rolling out on national health systems across the world,
Sure.
but we still don't have a model of how it actually works. Um, does this model you're developing, does that also account for the meridian system?
So the meridian system, right, you have to be careful about that. So, for example, I did professional training in shiatsu in which you have to learn all the meridian system because if you're going to learn about this stuff, well, I always think you have to you have to participate in it and undergo the transformation, not just study it propositionally from the outside. And the meridian system is not a single. There's competing schools, and it has really weird mistakes in it. Like they conjectured certain organs that don't actually exist, like the triple heater, which you don't have, by the way, and other things like that. And so, what's going on in this is, do those meridians pick up on? Are there more signposts for how to rhythmically move along the body, either with like a jab, a very like slight jab, or in shiatsu pressure, in ways that trigger what I've been talking about? I think that's what they actually are. I don't think they reflect. I don't think they're channels of which energy is flowing over the body. I think they are trails that have been signposted by people who figured, wait, if I make a kind of music in this person's arm between me and them, they will reconfigure how they are inhabiting that arm and how that arm is connecting them to the world. And that could be very powerfully healing.
Okay, that's an interesting take. I can't wait for this paper, John. Do let us know if
Should come
there's
out this year. Should come out this year.
great. Really looking forward to that. I'll add that to the show notes, listeners, if that comes a little later. So, John, thank you so much for your time and your patience with my obsessions again. It was too
No,
valuable. An
that was great.
opportunity to get you back and to finish that conversation because the connection between collective intelligence and this multiple plethoric dialogical approach to meaning, I think is just so deep. So that was really, really interesting. Tell us what's next. I think your series about the commonalities between Zen and Neoplatonism is almost out, right?
No, 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 no. We're working on it. I go on sabbatical in January of 2025, and we're going to film in that year. It's called the Philosophical Silk Road, and
Of course, because this
um,
one actually is going to require a pilgrimage, isn't it? So that's
yes,
a bit,
yeah,
bit more difficult to organize than a
yeah.
film
It's
series.
it's a really huge deal, but I'm really, really excited about it. It's going to be, I hope, a pilgrimage. It's going to uh, give substance. What I talked about the deepest kind of knowing actually requires transformation and participation. You can't just stand out from the side outside and state propositions and beliefs about it.
Well, we shall be very much on the lookout for that. John Vervaeke, thank you.
Thank you very much.